deeper into this mess, hit that like button, slap the subscribe so the Munitorum knows you're still breathing, and scratch down in the comments which Imperial Guard regiment you'd gamble your last ration on. Go on. Don't waste my air supply. Cheers.
Imagine a regiment of soldiers so unscrupulous and wild that even their allies keep one hand on their wallets around them. Picture the most murderous criminals the Imperium can find: thieves, killers, and lunatics, given lasguns and a license to loot. Now unleash them on the battlefields of the 41st Millennium, with nothing to lose and plenty to steal. What do you get? The Savlar Chem-Dogs, arguably the craziest, most notorious regiment in the Imperial Guard. The Savlar Chem-Dogs aren't your average stalwart heroes of humanity, far from it. They're the scum of the galaxy, pressed into service, hard-bitten convicts from a toxic hellhole world called Savlar. These are men, and likely some women, so desperate or depraved that the Imperial Guard is their last chance at life. And the way the Imperium motivates them, by promising they can keep whatever they loot from the enemy's corpse. Yes, really. Power swords, teeth, boots. If it's not nailed down, and even if it is, a Chem-Dog will try to swipe it. They fight not for honor or duty, but for the next stolen treasure and a breath of fresh air away from Savlar's poison mines. In a galaxy of over 1 million worlds and countless armies, the Chem-Dogs stand out as a uniquely chaotic force. Not chaos, as in heretical, though some might wonder, but chaotic in their unruly conduct. They charge into battle wearing ramshackle gear held together by duct tape and spite. They get high off inhaled combat drugs that turn them into berserkers. And if the enemy doesn't kill them, the commissars watching their backs just might, because discipline in a Chem-Dog regiment is maintained at gunpoint, literally. For those trying to wrap their head around it, think of a cross between a suicide squad of convicted felons and a pack of scavenging hyenas. If you've seen any war movie where the army recruits prisoners, think The Dirty Dozen or similar. Multiply that by 1,000 and add a lot more drugs and explosives. That's the vibe here. These aren't disciplined patriots. They're more like a sanctioned gang thrown at the enemy. The Imperium of Man, in all its dystopian glory, finds a use even for its villains. And the Savlar Chem-Dogs are the prime example. This script is going to dive deep into the story of these Savlar Chem-Dogs, who they are, where they come from, how they fight, and the infamous battles they've been thrown into. From the dank tunnels of Armageddon's underhives to the chemical swamps of distant war zones, the Chem-Dogs have seen it all, and stolen most of it too. We'll explore their hellish homeworld, Savlar, and its deadly mines. We'll meet the harsh judge who first wrangled these cutthroats into line. We'll witness their questionable battlefield tactics, like looting bodies in the middle of a firefight, and the grotesque glory of their preferred weapons, from flamethrowers to chem inhalers. And we'll recount their greatest and bloodiest hits, battles where they've shocked the enemy and appalled their allies in equal measure. Strap on your rebreather and hold on to your valuables. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why the Savlar Chem-Dogs are called the most crazy regiment in the Imperial Guard, and perhaps why the Imperium, in its desperation, still unleashes these madmen on its enemies. This is a tale of treachery and redemption, of survival at any cost, told with a wink and a scowl. Welcome to the underbelly of the Astra Militarum. Welcome to the Savlar Chem-Dogs. Origins of a Penal Legion. To understand the Chem-Dogs, we have to start with their wretched home, the world of Savlar itself. Savlar is a forsaken lump of rock, not far from the Armageddon sector, essentially one giant toxic waste dump with a sky. It wasn't always meant to be hell on Earth, or rather, hell on Savlar, but it sure became one. Long ago, the Imperium discovered Savlar had rich deposits of exotic chemicals buried in its volcanic moons. These chemicals were incredibly valuable for manufacturing munitions, promethium fuel, pharmaceuticals, you name it. So, naturally, the Imperium set up mining operations. But extracting those chemicals was nasty, dangerous work. The air itself is poison. The mines are full of corrosive fumes and lethal spills. Workers died by the dozens just doing their jobs, and productivity was never great. Most sane people wouldn't volunteer to work in such conditions. When Savlar's mines failed to meet their production quotas, this was back in the 39th millennium, thousands of years ago, the Imperium's response was both brutal and efficient. Turn Savlar into a penal colony. If regular citizens won't willingly live in your toxic mines, ship in those who don't have a choice. Overnight, Savlar was redesignated as a dumping ground for the worst criminals the sector had to offer. Murderers, recidivist thieves, traitors from failed rebellions, all packed onto prison ships and sent to Savlar to work off their life sentences digging up chemicals until they dropped dead. Among these initial inmates were thousands from something called the Wargear Rebellion, a failed uprising somewhere in the region. Instead of execution, those rebels got slow death in Savlar's mines. The penal workforce, guarded by contingents of the Adeptus Arbites, Imperial law enforcers, toiled in the chemical pits. Life expectancy on Savlar was abysmal. The place earned nicknames like the Dead Dog Moons, and underhive scum across the sector would say a criminal as good as dead was as dead as Savlar. It was a one-way ticket for anyone shipped there. A bleak, endless toil under the gaze of stern Arbites judges and shotgun-wielding guards. Needless to say, the inmates of Savlar were a desperate bunch. They had nothing to lose and every reason to hate the Imperium that had condemned them to this toxic hell. It likely began with a small spark, perhaps a work gang pushed past its breaking point. Imagine a scene deep in the bowels of a Savlar mine, hundreds of skeletal prisoners hacking at crystallized chemical deposits while choking on toxic fumes, Arbites overseers in heavy carapace armor standing watch with shock mauls and shotguns. Maybe an inmate collapsed from fume sickness and a guard kicked his limp body aside, barking for the others to keep working. Normally, the prisoners would grumble and obey, fearing punishment. But on this day, something snaps. A burly murderer from the Wargear intake, a man who in another life might have been a gang boss, drops his mining drill and tackles the nearest Arbites officer in a berserk fury. In an instant, decades of pent-up hatred ignite across the mines. Prisoners swing their pickaxes and drills at the guards, screaming that they'd rather die fighting than live one more day in this chemical hell. Gunshots ring out in the darkness as Arbites open fire, but the riot spreads faster than they can contain it. Whole tunnels are overrun by vengeful convicts. In the claustrophobic corridors, the Arbites are swarmed under a human wave of enraged, coughing, half-poisoned men who feel they have nothing to lose. From a few flickers, the revolt explodes into a full-fledged rebellion that engulfs facilities across Savlar. Arbites' precinct fortresses are besieged by mobs of rioters. Storage depots of chemicals are torched or turned into improvised poison bombs. It's chaos, the kind of chaos that normally would end with a mass slaughter of the convicts. And indeed, the official response was brutal. Judge Callistar and his enforcers clamped down hard. They sealed off sections of the mines, trapping many rebels to starve or suffocate, and rallied loyal security forces to crush armed gangs in open firefights. The prison population was being massacred until Callistar had his radical idea. Judge Callistar was the senior Adeptus Arbites magistrate in charge of Savlar's penal colony, effectively the ruler of this world of convicts. In the midst of this uprising, he made a move that probably horrified any proper Imperial commander. He armed a contingent of prisoners and turned them loose against the other rebels. Perhaps he handpicked the most vicious and cunning inmates, the ones who do anything for a shot at freedom, and gave them a simple deal: fight for me and you won't be executed today. It was a classic set a thief to catch a thief scenario, or in this case, set criminals to catch even nastier criminals. The gamble paid off. With a mix of brute force, the Arbites and loyal troops, and this ragtag conscript militia of convicts, Callistar put down the Savlar uprising. Now, having a band of armed criminals running around could have been a recipe for disaster. But Callistar saw potential. He realized that under the right conditions, these scum could be pointed like a weapon. After all, they'd just proven effective at fighting when given motivation. And so the seed of the Savlar Chem-Dogs as a military force was planted. Fast forward to the turn of the 41st Millennium, specifically the year 998 M41, the time of the Third War for Armageddon. War boss Gazkul, Thraka's massive orc invasion, was tearing apart the hive world of Armageddon, and the Imperium was scrambling for every able body it could throw into the meat grinder. They needed reinforcements desperately, from anywhere and everywhere. The Departamento Munitorum, which organizes the Imperial Guard, was scouring sectors for troops to send. And somebody, somewhere, looked at the inmate population of Savlar and had a crazy thought. Why not send in the prisoners? Thus, en masse, the convicts of Savlar were conscripted into the Imperial Guard. Instead of a handful helping an arbitres judge quell a riot, we're talking whole regiments raised from Savlar's prisons. They were nicknamed the Chem-Dogs after their world, a nod to both the chemical mines and perhaps the dead dog moniker. This was unprecedented. A full Imperial Guard fighting force made up of hardened criminals and society's dregs. Penal units weren't entirely new. In the past, the Imperium had used criminals in war, but usually as cannon fodder detachments or special suicide squads like the infamous Last Chancers. What was different here was the scale and formal recognition: full regiments, with a homeworld designation and all, composed of convicts. Of course, you couldn't just give these criminal regiments bolt guns and say good luck. They'd desert or turn bandit the minute they left orbit, if not kept in check. Judge Callistar, instrumental in raising these regiments, had to instill some form of discipline and incentive to keep the Savlar units in line. He fell back on what he learned quelling the uprising. The right motivation is everything. So the Chem-Dogs were given two ironclad directives, simple and brutal. First, whatever you take from the enemy, you can keep. Second, if you break the law or disobey orders, you get sent straight back to Savlar. That was the deal. Carrot and stick. The carrot was pure greed, loot, plunder, spoils of war. For men who had been stripped of all possessions and lived in squalor, the promise that anything you grab in battle is yours was a powerful lure. It appealed to their larcenous instincts. If a Chem-Dog saw a fancy orc blade or a handful of valuable tech trinkets on a battlefield, he'd fight like hell to secure it, knowing it'd be his reward. The stick was the one thing these prisoners feared, being sent back home, back to the toxic mines, to slow agonizing death in Savlar's belly. For a Savlar convict, a quick death in battle might seem preferable to a long death by poisoning, and being sent back was as good as a death sentence. They all knew it. Under this framework, the Savlar Chem-Dogs regiments were formed and dispatched to war. It was a devil's bargain for the Imperium. Take the worst humanity has to offer, promise them loot and freedom from their prison world, and hope they hate the enemy slightly more than they hate their masters. As one might imagine, the Munitorum also attached plenty of minders, like commissars, which we'll get to make sure these new soldiers didn't just cut and run the moment they landed somewhere nicer than Savlar. Thus, the legend began. What started as a local solution to a prison riot became full-blown Imperial Guard penal legions. Judge Callistar went from magistrate to something like a commanding officer, whipping whole legions of murderers into shape just in time to throw them at the orcs, threatening Armageddon. It was unorthodox and more than a little risky, but the grim truth of the Imperium is that when extinction looms, High Command will try anything, even trusting convicts with lasguns. The Savlar Chem-Dogs marched off to war, likely under heavy guard even as they deployed, with promises of plunder ringing in their ears and the threat of Savlar's mines driving them forward. They were about to make a name for themselves, for better or worse, on the battlefields of the Imperium. Discipline at gunpoint, command and control, transforming a pack of convicts into something resembling a military unit was no small feat. The Imperium couldn't rely on normal chains of command or honor codes to keep the Savlar Chem-Dogs in line. These soldiers weren't driven by patriotism or faith. They were driven by self-preservation and greed. So the Imperial Guard brass put several special measures in place. First and foremost, every Chem-Dog regiment is shadowed by an inordinate number of commissars. Commissars are the political officers and enforcers attached to Imperial Guard units tasked with maintaining discipline, morale, and loyalty, often by fear. In a typical Guard regiment, one commissar might be assigned to keep an eye on things. In a Chem-Dog regiment, you get whole cadres of them. It's said the Chem-Dogs have the highest ratio of commissars to soldiers in the entire Guard, and those commissars don't hesitate to execute any trooper who steps out of line. Hesitate to charge the enemy? Bam! Summary execution. Caught trying to slip away from the battlefield with pockets full of loot instead of fighting. A bolt pistol round to the back of the head will cure that thieving impulse. The commissars keep the Chem-Dogs in check through constant intimidation. The fear of a commissar's wrath often barely outweighs the Chem-Dogs' natural rebelliousness, but just enough to make them think twice before, say, shooting their officer or running off with a stolen supply crate. However, because the Chem-Dog units are so unruly, the Imperium had to get creative beyond just flooding them with commissars. Enter the Mercies. This is a unique role found accompanying Savlar regiments. A Mercy is essentially a military warden, a provost officer specifically for penal troops. These Mercies are drawn from the Adeptus Arbites or other military police cadres. They dress almost like junior commissars, black flak coats, high-peaked caps, mirror visors or rebreather masks, and often carrying a bolt pistol on one hip and a shock baton or neural whip on the other. The title Mercy is dark humor at its finest. The only mercy they typically dispense is a quick death to spare a prisoner, a slower one. Mercies operate alongside and under the regiment's commissar. They aren't part of the normal command hierarchy of sergeants and captains. Instead, they're a parallel enforcement arm. Every Chem-Dog in the unit, from the lowest trooper up to the colonel, knows to fear the Mercies. In fact, Mercies are so feared and respected in a twisted way that even the regiment's officers must address the Mercies as Sir. That's right. A battalion commander who might normally be a colonel still has to call his Mercy Sir and defer to his authority in disciplinary matters. Officially, Mercies answer only to the commissar and ultimately to the Adeptus Arbites chain of command. In practice, they're like sheepdogs herding the wolves, if that analogy makes any sense. What exactly do Mercies do? A bit of everything unpleasant. They conduct roll calls and inspections to make sure none of the Chem-Dogs have slipped away or stolen prohibited items. And by prohibited, we mean anything that isn't their standard issue. These guys would nick the buttons off a general's uniform, if not watched. Mercies lead the daily prayers to the God Emperor, forcing these convicts to show piety, at least outwardly. They march right alongside the penal troops on those long, grueling treks, ready to literally whip laggards into moving. During battle, mercies ensure there's no cowardice. They'll gun down anyone who tries to flee or hide instead of fighting. After the battle, part of a mercy's grim duty is collecting the identification tags of any penal trooper who either falls in battle or is summarily executed, keeping a tally of the regiment's attrition, which, in a Chem-Dog unit, is often high from both combat and discipline. To give a sense of what discipline means in a Chem-Dog regiment, imagine the morning muster at camp. The penal troopers assemble, chained together in ranks in some accounts, while a mercy stalks the lines. He checks each prisoner's kit, not out of concern for cleanliness, but to ensure no one has stolen a laspack or hidden a forbidden blade. If a Savlar trooper even glances the wrong way, the mercy's bolt pistol is under his chin in a heartbeat. There's a story of a mercy who found one man hoarding 2 canteens of water, one pilfered from a dead comrade. The mercy didn't bother asking questions. He simply drew his sidearm and shot the thief in front of the entire platoon, then and there. "Water's for the living," he reportedly said coldly as the offender's body hit the ground. Lesson taught. Such summary executions are not the exception. They're a daily possibility hanging over every Chem-Dog's head. This climate of constant, immediate consequences is the only glue for these units. And so far, it's worked, albeit at a high attrition rate for those who can't toe the line. Mercies are also tasked with leading their charges in prayer to the God Emperor, keeping pace on forced marches, ensuring that their penal troopers are always secure and under close guard during transportation from one theater of war to another, and making certain that there is no retreat in the face of the enemy. Most Savlars have no love for authority or piety. The Emperor's name was likely a curse word on their lips in their past life. But now, under the watchful eye of a mercy with a neural whip, they mouth the hymns and bang their chests in salute like good little soldiers. Some do it sardonically, others out of genuine fear. Yet, interestingly, a few Chem-Dogs do take the creed to heart over time. There are accounts of former thieves who became fervent believers on the battlefield, perhaps deciding that if they're risking their necks daily, they'd better make peace with him on Terra. One infamous Chem-Dog preacher, sometimes referred to as Pious Paulie, was a gang enforcer who found faith and began loudly reciting imperial psalms before battles, to the eye rolls of his comrades, reportedly. Whether true faith or performative, the required prayers add another layer of surreality to these regiments. Picture a chorus of hardened criminals rasping out the Emperor's litany of fury in unison, moments before they charge and loot everything in sight. The juxtaposition is almost comical, but in the grim darkness of the future, faith and felony can strangely coexist. The command structure of Savlar units is also unusual in other ways. Notably, the officers leading Chem-Dog regiments are often not from Savlar at all. The Imperium wisely realizes that giving an unrepentant convict ultimate command over 1,000 other convicts might not end well. Instead, many of the senior officers are outsiders, often Schola Progenium graduates, the orphans of Imperial servants raised in military academies, who are assigned to lead these penal units. In some cases, high-ranking commissars themselves double as commanding officers, with titles like Commissar Colonel. That might sound strange, but it's happened. Essentially, the commissar is given formal command of the regiment, merging the roles. When a commissar is also the colonel, you can bet discipline is iron-fisted. Two known examples of such leaders are Commissar Colonel Damart and Commissar Colonel Van Bast, who have been associated with Chem-Dog forces in some accounts. They show up in records involving super-heavy tank campaigns, indicating even tank companies might be composed of Savlar crews under commissar leadership. They exemplify that blend of officer and executioner required to ride herd on these chaotic troops. Middle and lower rank officers, like captains, lieutenants, might sometimes be drawn from Savlar's own ranks if a particular Chem-Dog shows an aptitude for leadership, or at least violence and survival. But even if a Chem-Dog earns a stripe or two, they're kept on a tight leash by the commissar and mercies above them. The trust only goes so far. Usually, these promoted convicts are the reformed types, using that word loosely, who've fought loyally in a few battles and proven they can shout orders at their fellow scum. Still, any such individual knows that a single step out of line means a very messy execution at the hands of their beloved commissar. It's a lot of stick, not much carrot, once they're in the guard structure. Now, how do these regiments operate when not actively fighting? Very carefully from the perspective of those guarding them. During transit between war zones, the Chem-Dogs are effectively prisoners under guard. They might be chained or confined to barracks on ships, with mercies ensuring none of them tries to hijack a shuttle or escape at a port. They travel in transports with armed watchmen, and every stop is supervised. Supplies and logistics in a Savlar unit are another nightmare. Normally, a quartermaster hands out weapons, ammo, rations, and trusts, to a degree, the soldiers to use them appropriately. With Chem-Dogs, any unattended supply crate might grow legs and vanish into some trooper's private stash. There are anecdotes, perhaps apocryphal but telling, of supply officers going insane trying to account for missing equipment when Savlar regiments are around. One dark joke among the Departamento Munitorum goes, "Emperor protect us if the Chem-Dogs, a rattling sniper company, and the Blood Ravens ever deploy to the same war zone. Nothing will be left where it was." For the uninitiated, rattlings are small sniper troops notorious for pilfering food and valuables, and the Blood Ravens are a Space Marine chapter infamous for acquiring relics that don't belong to them. Put those three together and you have theft on an epic scale. Other Imperial Guard regiments stationed alongside the Savlar Chem-Dogs have learned to be wary of their allies. Sure, the Chem-Dogs will fight the enemy ferociously, but if a battle ends and you find your pack missing, or the corpse of your fallen friend stripped of armor and boots, well, look no further than the Chem-Dogs' salvage teams. It's not officially condoned, of course. Imperial commanders frown on outright theft from fellow Imperial forces, and a commissar will execute a Chem-Dog caught looting an ally. That's considered treasonous. But let's be honest, on a chaotic battlefield, who's to say whether that expensive Auspex scanner was lost to enemy fire or snatched by a Savlar trooper in the confusion? The Chem-Dogs take the phrase "spoils of war" to heart. Despite all these measures, or perhaps because of them, the Savlar Chem-Dogs do manage to function as military units. It's a precarious balance. The men in the ranks are volatile, ill-disciplined by nature, and always testing limits. The authority over them is almost entirely fear-based. But fear can be a powerful glue. Add to that the fact that many Chem-Dogs are paradoxically motivated. Yes, they want to desert or steal or misbehave, but they also really don't want to be sent back home. So most toe the line, at least when it counts. There have been, unsurprisingly, incidents of Savlar regiments going off the rails. One infamous case involved the Savlar 14th Chem-Dogs Regiment. After a particular campaign, the 14th was amalgamated with another Imperial Guard unit, the Necromundan 86th, a regiment from the hive world of Necromunda. The idea was to combine two understrength forces into one, It turned out to be a terrible idea. The Savlar 14th and the Necromundin 86th hated each other on sight. Tensions ran high, likely fueled by cultural differences, and maybe the Savlar's habit of pilfering didn't endear them to the straight-laced Necromundins. Things got so bad that, instead of fighting the enemy, the Chem-Dogs and the Necromundins started fighting one another. A full-on brawl between supposed allies erupted, escalating to exchanges of gunfire. The situation only stopped when a third party, several Cadian regiments, known for their professionalism, had to intervene and physically separate them. By the end of that fiasco, an Imperial supply depot had mysteriously exploded. One wonders if some Savlar salvaging went awry, and both regiments were in disarray. Needless to say, High Command probably learned a lesson. Don't mix Chem-Dogs with normal units too closely, or at least keep an eye on them if you do. All of this paints a picture of just how crazy managing a Chem-Dog regiment can be. It's a high-wire act of terror, vigilance, and occasional brute force from the commissars and mercies. Yet, with all that said, when the bullets, or lasbolts, start flying toward the enemy, these regiments can and do fight effectively, as we'll explore in their combat methods next. The key is that the Imperium has essentially weaponized the Chem-Dogs' base instincts while caging their worst impulses. It's not perfect, far from it, but in a universe beset by horrors, even a half-feral attack dog can be pointed toward the right target and let loose. Fighting dirty. Combat doctrine of the Chem-Dogs. When it comes to battle, the Savlar Chem-Dogs aren't what you'd call a textbook, orderly force. Forget elegant maneuvers or shining heroics. These guys fight dirty in every sense of the word. Interestingly, their very background, working in toxic mines and growing up, or rather surviving in a poisonous environment, has shaped them into specialists of a sort. They excel in battlefields that would make most guardsmen double over gagging or running for the hills. Give a Chem-Dog a pitch-black, foul-smelling tunnel crawling with mutants and reeking of chemical waste, and he'll feel right at home. In more polite terms, their combat doctrine emphasizes hostile environment warfare, close-quarters fighting, and opportunistic tactics. In less polite terms, they run headlong into the worst places and make a nasty mess of the enemy, and occasionally themselves. One of the first major deployments of the Chem-Dogs, the Third War for Armageddon, set the tone for how they'd be used. Armageddon was a heavily industrial hive world with sprawling city-sized factory complexes, hives, and vast underhive networks beneath them. When orcs invaded, some tried to burrow or sneak through those underhive tunnels to bypass the main defenses. The underhives are essentially toxic, lawless zones beneath the cities, filled with mutated creatures, pollutants, and all manner of dangers. Perfect playground for the likes of Savlar's finest. Imperial commanders like General Kurov realized the Chem-Dogs were perfect for fighting in these cramped, noxious underhive environments. So, Savlar regiments were literally sent down into the bowels of Armageddon's cities to root out orc infiltrators. And Emperor knows what else down there. In such conditions, the Chem-Dogs shone, well, as much as a group of filthy, drug-fueled convicts can shine. They quickly adapted to the maze-like tunnels, the low visibility, and the choking atmospheres. After all, they had their rebreathers strapped on and were accustomed to breathing worse air back home. While a normal unit might hesitate to go delving in radioactive sewage or crawl through rusted maintenance shafts that have been seen daylight in centuries, the Savlars didn't blink. Partly it's because they're desperate or foolish, and partly because they knew that was their ticket to loot. Under the cities, they found all sorts of abandoned tech, archaeotech relics, and valuable scrap lying in forgotten vaults. And you better believe they pocketed as much as they could carry. The Savlar approach to combat is often described as aggressive to the point of ferocity, but also undisciplined. They charge in fast, especially once the stimulants in their bloodstream kick in. Many chem-dogs jack up their courage by using nitrochem inhalers built into their rebreather masks. Just before a fight, you'll see them twist a valve or press a button on their mask apparatus, releasing a dose of concocted combat drugs directly into their lungs. The effect is immediate and manic. Pupils dilate, muscles surge with adrenaline, pain receptors dull, and they fly into a hyper-aggressive state. Under the influence, a chem-dog trooper can shrug off injuries that would drop a sane man, and he'll keep charging even under heavy fire. The downside, aside from long-term organ failure, but who cares about long-term in a penal legion, is that subtlety and self-preservation go out the window. A pack of drug-amped chem-dogs might storm a fortified position in a berserker rush, ignoring orders to take cover or retreat because they literally feel invincible for a few minutes. It can win a battle, or it can get the whole lot of them killed if not directed properly. Because of their tendencies, chem-dogs are often used in shock troop roles. They're the guys you send in to clear a dungeon of tunnels, to spearhead an assault through a breached wall, or to flush out an enemy-held hab block with flamethrowers. Jobs that are high-risk, up-close, and nasty are their bread and butter. They aren't usually trusted with careful defensive actions or strategic reserves. Would you leave a bunch of thieves alone in charge of guarding your supply depot? Probably not. Instead, they get pointed at the enemy's ugliest, most hard-to-reach bits and told, "Go nuts." And they do. Preferred weapons and tactics play into this. The chem-dogs love flame weapons, partly because flamers are ideal for close quarters. You don't need fine aim to torch a room full of orcs or heretics. Just pull the trigger and bathe everything in cleansing or not-so-cleansing fire. But I suspect another reason is psychological. Wielding a flamethrower gives a Savlar trooper a sense of power and chaos that suits his mindset. It's a weapon of terror and destruction, something a criminal might appreciate. They also favor heavy bolters as the other mainstay. A heavy bolter is basically a large-caliber machine gun that fires explosive rounds. It's brutal, loud, and messy, perfect for mowing down targets in cramped corridors or holding a choke point with overwhelming fire. Notice these are both relatively short-ranged infantry weapons, again fitting their close-in fighting style. What about lasguns, the standard rifle of the Guard? Yes, they have those too, likely battered models passed down from other regiments or acquired spares. But you won't see Savlar marksmen lining up in perfect volley formation or executing fancy Overwatch patterns. If a chem-dog sees something move in the gloom ahead, he's liable to empty a las clip at it, then charge and see what's left. Subtle they are not. One amusing or alarming aspect of Savlar combat behavior is their compulsive scavenging in the midst of battle. While every army has looters after the fight, chem-dogs might start looting during the fight. There are stories, half rumor, half truth, of Savlar fighters pausing to strip a fallen enemy of valuables even as bullets are flying. It sounds absurd, and it is. But for these guys, that's part of the incentive to fight in the first place. Of course, if a commissar catches someone doing this instead of focusing on the enemy, that trooper might get a bolt round through the skull as a reminder of priorities. Still, in the chaos of a big battle, some opportunism inevitably happens. It's the kind of thing that would horrify a Cadian drill sergeant, but with chem-dogs you accept a bit of that as long as they get the job done. One notorious after-action report from Armageddon tells of a chem-dog who, in the midst of a firefight in an underhive hab block, noticed an enemy officer's coat had golden epaulettes. The promise of that shiny gold proved irresistible. The Savlar trooper dashed out of cover, sheared off the epaulette with his combat knife, and only then resumed shooting at the understandably confused orcs around him. He survived, barely, and later stitched the gold piece into his own uniform as a trophy. His commissar was livid, but the story circulated among the men as a point of pride. That's quintessential Chem-Dog thinking. Another anecdote speaks of a Chem-Dog corporal nicknamed Toe-Off Snatcher, who during a clash with orcs would literally punch out the biggest orc's teeth after killing it, collecting the large tusk-like teeth, because orc molars are used as currency among greenskins. Toe-Off Snatcher figured he could use them to barter with orcs or traders later. In the 32nd Savlar, it's said he amassed a sack full of teeth by campaign's end. What he planned to do with them is anyone's guess. These antics sound cartoonish, but they underscore how differently the Chem-Dogs' minds operate amid combat. While a Mordian Iron Guard might be reciting combat doctrine and holding formation, a Savlar is thinking, "Don't die, and what can I grab before we bug out?" Speaking of getting the job done, the Savlar Chem-Dogs have proven quite good at urban warfare as well. Hives and cities have lots of cover and shadow to creep through, lots of back doors and drains to exploit. And the Chem-Dogs, being criminals, think like criminals. They'll sneak around a flank via a sewer if it means catching an enemy by surprise. They'll happily break rules of engagement. Not that the Imperium has many of those when fighting Xenos or traitors, but even among guard regiments, there's a certain soldierly conduct which Savlars cheerfully ignore. Use poison gas on the enemy? Sure, if they have it. Torch a building to flush out snipers without worrying about collateral damage? Absolutely. It's probably not their building, and if it has loot inside, they'll go in after the flames die down. Another strength, tunnel fighting and siege assaults. On more than one occasion, Chem-Dogs have been tasked with storming enemy-held fortifications by sneaking in through utility tunnels or sewer lines that connect to the fortress. It's the exact kind of dangerous infiltration that calls for a bit of a death wish and a disregard for personal safety. Perfect for penal legionnaires. They might crawl through sludge with grenades strapped to their chests, then burst up from a drain in the middle of an enemy command post, guns blazing and blades swinging. It's the kind of thing that usually only super elite units might try, like Special Forces or Space Marine Scouts. But the difference is, the Chem-Dogs aren't exactly elite in skill or finesse. They're just crazy enough to try it, and numerous enough that if half of them die in the attempt, the other half might still succeed by sheer bloody-minded persistence. Despite their lack of discipline on the individual level, when properly corralled, they can function decently as a unit. They've had to. Sheer anarchy would mean complete failure, and then they'd be executed or sent back. Over time, one imagines that within each squad or platoon, a sort of pack hierarchy forms. The meanest or smartest criminal in the bunch often becomes a sergeant, officially or de facto. These small unit leaders might enforce a crude order, perhaps just bullying their squad into following orders, since they themselves want to live and get loot. Camaraderie is a funny concept among murderers and thieves, but facing death together can bond even the most ornery souls. There are likely Chem-Dog squads that become tight-knit, like a gang family. Woe betide an outsider, even from another Savlar squad, who tries to mess with them. That could partly explain incidents of intra-regiment squabbles, cliques of hard cases settling grudges. But in battle, that squad will fight together, back to back, because they know no one else has their back in this madhouse of an army. The Savlar Chem-Dogs are also known to employ some support elements. They aren't purely light infantry. They can have heavier firepower assets when available. For instance, they make use of ogrins, abhuman brutes that the god often employs. An ogryn is basically an enormous, muscle-bound, not-too-bright human subspecies ideal for close combat and heavy lifting. If you think normal chem-dogs are unruly, imagine an ogryn one. Actually, ogryns often have a childlike loyalty, but usually to whomever is kind to them or whom they perceive as boss. In a penal legion context, they might chain ogryns or lure them with food to get them to charge the enemy. Once unleashed, an ogryn in a chem-dog unit could be like an attack bear, pointed at the enemy and turned loose, perhaps with a slab shield and grenade gauntlet. The chem-dogs won't win points for subtlety by bringing along ogryn muscle, but it adds to their shock assault capability. Then we have the famous, or infamous, Savlar Chem-Riders, the Rough Rider cavalry from Savlar. Rough Riders in the Guard are typically cavalry units, often on horseback or native beasts, armed with lances. Some even explosive-tipped lances for a one-time high-impact charge. On Savlar, there are no healthy horses frolicking in green meadows. The environment would kill a normal horse quick. Instead, the chem-dogs ride mutated creatures known colloquially as chem-beasts. These creatures have been altered either by Savlar's polluted environment or possibly by Imperial experimentation to survive in toxic conditions. Picture a grotesque, hairless, horse-like creature, perhaps with boils or scales, nostrils filtering out poisonous air, and maybe an extra set of kidneys to process toxins. That might be a chem-beast. They're ugly, ill-tempered mounts, but hardy. A chem-rider regiment is essentially a biker gang from hell, on actual beasts instead of bikes. They thunder into battle out of the toxic smoke, their mounts shrieking. Each rider is typically equipped with a lance that contains a chemical payload or straight-up explosives. They charge in and boom, lance goes off like a spear bomb, blowing apart enemies in melee. It's a high-risk, high-reward attack. Very terrifying, quite effective against things like armored infantry or light vehicles. But Rough Riders usually don't have a long life expectancy once they've expended their lances and are stuck in close combat with maybe a sword or pistol. The Chem Riders, being convicts, probably don't mind the risk. Riding gives them speed to perhaps outrun a losing fight if their beast cooperates, and it certainly gives them another avenue to snatch loot quickly from fallen foes, faster than on foot. On Armageddon, 2 full regiments of Chem Riders were deployed alongside 6 infantry regiments of Chem-Dogs used to patrol the ash wastes and the outskirts of Hades' hive. They likely performed hit-and-run attacks on orc stragglers and acted as mobile scouts, albeit very unpredictable ones. One should also note the Savlar Chem-Dogs are often classified as light infantry. That's an Imperial Guard designation for troops that move fast, carry lighter gear, and often fight on foot without heavy armor support in rough terrain. Not but all Chem-Dog units are strictly light infantry. They do have some mechanized and armored support, which we'll detail in the equipment section. But by and large, their style aligns with light infantry ethos: flexibility, speed, and making do without the luxury of big fortifications or artillery parks. They often lack the heavy artillery or air support that more prestigious regiments might get. After all, you wouldn't trust a convict with something like a complex artillery targeting cogitator, would you? Actually, the irony is, some Savlar units do end up manning artillery or tanks, usually after they've acquired them somehow or when assigned to defensive roles. But it's more of a rarity. In summary, the Savlar Chem-Dogs fight like the bastard offspring of a street gang and a shock assault force. They rush where others hesitate. They use fire and fury liberally, and they turn battlefields into looters' markets as soon as the enemy is on the back foot. There's an unpredictability to them that can actually work to the Imperium's advantage. Enemies expecting disciplined ranks find instead a horde of wild-eyed marauders who might come at them from sewer grates or charge through toxic smoke without fear. On the other hand, that same wild streak is a liability that Imperial commanders must always account for. In the right setting and under tight supervision, the Chem-Dogs hit like a sledgehammer to the enemy's face. In the wrong setting, or if their leash slips, they could just as easily fall apart or turn that sledgehammer on something they shouldn't. But one thing's for sure, when the Savlar Chem-Dogs go to war, it's a spectacle of savage and slightly insane ferocity that few other guard regiments can match. Scavenged gear and makeshift armor, Wargear of the Chem-Dogs. If you ever see a group of Savlar Chem-Dogs, one thing will be immediately clear. They don't exactly have that spiffy uniform appearance of, say, the Cadians or the Mordian Iron Guard. No polished buttons or crisp, matching flak armor here. The Chem-Dogs look like they rolled through a scrapyard on their way to the battlefield, which, in a sense, they often did. You can picture one, a lanky Savlar trooper named, say, Bren Backstab Cole, stepping forward. His uniform is a tattered patchwork of different camo patterns. His jacket might have Cadian field gray sleeves, but a Necromundan ash-waste coat body, stitched together in a haphazard fashion. Around his neck is a scavenged scarf that once belonged to a fallen commissar. He wears it mostly because it's warm and maybe out of a sly sense of irony. Cole's helmet is missing. Instead, he's tied a bandana under his rebreather mask and stuck a handful of low sticks, smoke cigarettes, in the strap for later. Across his chest, pieces of metal armor overlap. One plate clearly has a faded Aquila from Acadian's breastplate. Another is a cut piece of tire tread used as a pauldron. He jingles slightly when he walks, because he's got tools and trophies hanging off his belt. A stolen engineer's spanner here, a string of alien claws there, a tarnished pocket chrono. Clock. He nicked from a tech priest's corpse as a retirement gift to himself. On his back, instead of a standard-issue rucksack, he's rigged an old ammunition crate with rope straps to carry his loot and kit. Within it, ammo and rations mix with random bits of plunder, a silver candlestick, a bundle of copper wire, a bottle of amasek he nicked from a supply drop. In his hands, he cradles a somewhat battered lasgun. The weapon's casing has dozens of hash-mark scratches, each one an unofficial kill tally, or maybe days survived. Cole swears the gun used to belong to an Armageddon Steel Legion sergeant. It's got a custom grip and an engraved plate to suggest it. But how he got it, he won't say. It's also adorned with graffiti. In white chalk on the stock, he's scrawled "Born to Loot" as a cheeky motto. This imaginary Trooper Cole is an amalgam of real traits many Chem-Dogs exhibit. No two look exactly the same, but they all share that ramshackle, piratical aura. Let's start with the most distinctive piece of kit for a Savlar soldier, the rebreather unit. Because Savlar's atmosphere is laced with toxins, everyone from that planet is accustomed to wearing gas masks and rebreathers just to survive routine life. The Guard issues the Savlar regiments their own pattern of rebreather, which is known, aptly, as the Savlar pattern respirator. It's a clunky contraption, typically a full-face mask connected by 4 corrugated hoses to a large canister worn on the back or hip. The canister houses chemical filters that scrub out poisons from the air. It's not sleek or comfortable. In fact, it's heavy and awkward compared to what some other regiments use. For instance, the famous Armageddon Steel Legion, the native guard of Armageddon, who also fight in toxic environs due to their planet's polluted air, have a much more streamlined mask system. Well, the Chem-Dogs noticed that too. And being who they are, they proceeded to acquire the better gear whenever possible. During the war on Armageddon, it became almost a running joke that wherever a Chem-Dog unit had passed through, Steel Legion troops would complain of missing gas masks from their supply. Reports filtered in of large numbers of Armageddon pattern respirators mysteriously going missing in zones where Chem-Dogs operated. The upshot: many Savlar troops started sporting sleeker Steel Legion masks instead of their issued four-hose monsters. How they got them? Shrug. Lost in the warp, perhaps, or fell off a supply truck. The truth is obvious, but as long as the Chem-Dogs were fighting effectively, higher-ups were willing to turn a blind eye to a little intra-imperial borrowing. Regardless of mask pattern, almost every Chem-Dog is always wearing some kind of breathing apparatus in battle. It's practically their symbol. They often keep them on even in breathable air, maybe out of habit, maybe to hide their face, maybe because some are actually huffing those aggression-inducing chemicals through the mask's inhaler, or all of the above. It gives them a sinister, faceless look, like a horde of marauders with bug-eyed goggles and wheezing filters. Moving on to armor and uniform. Officially, as members of the Astra Militarum, they're issued standard flak armor and fatigues. In practice, a standard Chem-Dog kit might include a flak vest or jacket, often black or gray, maybe with hazard stripes or crude gang symbols scratched on, and ragged fatigues that have been patched over and over. They might have shoulder guards. One could be a piece of Cadian armor painted over. Another could be a chunk of metal from a scrapped truck. Helmets are hit or miss. Some wear the typical Imperial Guard helmet, again, possibly pilfered from a depot, since many penal units start with cast-off equipment. Others prefer no helmet or a simpler cap, especially if it interferes with their mask straps. A lot of them don't bother with uniform trousers or boots if they can find something more comfy. You might see a Chem-Dog in what looks like civilian boots, or even an armored boot from a Space Marine scout he somehow looted, though Emperor knows how he'd come by that. One vivid image described is a Chem-Dog trooper with improvised armor plating, bits of metal bolted or riveted onto a leather jacket, giving a sort of post-apocalyptic raider vibe. And indeed, that's what they resemble. Not a disciplined soldier, but a scavenger warband member. The difference? They carry Imperial identification tags, for as long as they're alive, and they fight under the Imperial Aquila banner, when someone hasn't stolen the banner fabric to make a tent. Just kidding, mostly. Weapons. The Munitorum isn't keen on giving penal legions the fanciest guns. There's an old saying, don't hand a razor to a man who might cut your throat with it. Likewise, you wouldn't want to issue a bunch of unpredictable criminals with, say, plasma guns that could melt a tank. Who knows where they'd point those things, or who they'd sell them to after the battle. So the Savlar regiments typically start with the basics. The trusty lasgun, standard issue flashlight of the Imperium. It's robust, it's not easily sabotaged, and critically, its power packs can be recharged rather than relying on supply of ammo, which is good for Chem-Dogs who might not always keep logistic lines intact. What with their quartermaster possibly being found in a ditch, minus his boots after dealing with them. Every Chem-Dog is going to have a lasgun or laspistol at minimum, but many seem to favor shotguns as well. It makes sense. Shotguns are brutal at close range and easy to maintain. Good for ship-boarding actions, trench clearing, or blowing apart a mutated rat the size of a dog that jumps at you in a tunnel. A slug or a blast of scattershot does wonders in the confines they often fight in. But where the Savlar armories really diverge from the norm is in all the non-standard gear they carry. A lot of Chem-Dogs lug additional weapons or trinkets they've picked up along the way. You'll find troopers with extra knives, some possibly ritual blades from a hive gang world, others just sharp bits of scrap they filed into a shiv. Sidearms that aren't regulation issue, stub revolvers, auto pistols, likely looted off under hive gangers or enemy officers. Maybe a few carry chainswords or machetes for close combat, again possibly acquired from battlefields. There's even talk of chem-dogs getting their hands on exotic stuff. A flamer trooper who attached a Xenos-made blade to his weapon as a bayonet, or a sniper who somehow got a hold of an Eldar optical scope for his rifle and amazingly figured out how to use it. These instances aren't common, but they underscore that a chem-dog unit's armory is often a bizarre mix of whatever they can beg, borrow, or steal. Imperial records and complaints note that voxcasters, radios, often go missing around the chem-dogs. Many Savlar troopers, if they can manage it, like to carry a personal vox unit. Not because they're chatty on the battlefield, but because a voxcaster can be valuable barter material, or rigged to listen in on enemy transmissions, or even used to tap into friendly comms, which they're probably not supposed to do. A story goes that a chem-dog unit once consistently knew where the Munitorum supply drops would land before anyone else, because one enterprising trooper stole a long-range vox and was eavesdropping on the supply officer's signals. True or not, it sounds exactly like something they do. Now, regarding special and heavy weapons, we covered their penchant for flamers and heavy bolters, which are commonly assigned to them. There's logic there. Flamers don't require pinpoint discipline to be effective, just courage or recklessness to get close. Heavy bolters give them some heavy firepower without requiring the technical know-how of more sophisticated weapons. They're sometimes seen with grenade launchers as well, a handy, simple weapon to lob explosives around corners. One might expect that giving criminals grenade launchers could result in some accidental fragging of superiors or each other, but presumably the commissars keep an eye on the trigger-happy grenadiers. What about more advanced kit like plasma guns, melta guns, sniper rifles, etc.? Officially not common, but the longer a chem-dog regiment survives, the more likely some of these will filter in. Perhaps they'll salvage a plasma gun from a fallen stormtrooper, or have a melta given for a specific mission. If that happens, I pity the poor tech priest who has to later retrieve said valuable weapon. Prying a plasma gun out of a chem-dog's hands after he's used it to incinerate a Chaos Space Marine might be tricky, unless you offer something in exchange, perhaps a big shiny chainsword to distract him. One category the chem-dogs particularly love is explosives. Mines, demo charges, inferno grenades, etc. They aren't subtle with them either. In the Callistar campaign against orcs, more on that later, Savlar squads famously used nuclear thermal charges to collapse tunnels and wipe out pockets of enemy troops. That's right, they set off mini-nukes underground, not exactly concerned for safety or collateral damage. It worked, blew the orcs to bits, but also likely buried a few chem-dogs and certainly ruined any nearby real estate. They'll happily rig traps or blow open vault doors if it means a quick victory, and maybe access to whatever the enemy was hiding. A mention must be made of archaeotech, ancient rare tech from humanity's past. Most Imperial soldiers wouldn't even recognize a piece of archaeotech if they saw it, and if they did, they'd probably hand it over to the proper authorities, because messing with unknown tech can bring the wrath of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The chem-dogs, if they find a strange glowing gadget in the underhive, they'll stuff it in their pack first and ask questions, or not, later. Some have been known to carry these items into battle, possibly figuring if it's a weapon or shield or something, might as well use it. There are accounts of Savlar fighters brandishing things like a one-of-a-kind digi-weapon ring that fires a deadly beam. No one knows where Private X got that, but it wasn't on any inventory list. Or using a relic device that projects a refractor field, protecting them from energy blasts. Of course, these are exceptions. Most Chem-Dogs fight with decidedly crude gear, but it adds to their legend that you never quite know what trick or trinket a Savlar might pull out of his sack. On to vehicles. Despite being penal light infantry in concept, the Savlar Chem-Dogs can deploy with armored support when available. Over years of campaigning, they've gotten their hands on or been assigned various vehicles. They use the reliable Chimera armored personnel carriers to move around, especially if crossing a toxic wasteland or heavy fire zone. Even a convict appreciates a ride in a metal box versus marching in the open. Of course, one wonders if the Chimera driver's compartment has an extra lock to prevent the trooper from just joyriding off to freedom. But likely those drivers are again under watch, or maybe they're outsiders attached from an armored unit. They also utilize Sentinels, the one-man walker vehicles that are great for scouting and skirmishing. Sentinels are relatively simple. Basically, a walking metal frame with a gun on it. A Chem-Dog scout might plod around in a Sentinel, checking out tight canyons or ruined streets that a tank can't enter. If he finds something valuable in the field, the Sentinel's cargo net might mysteriously bulge a little more on the way back. For heavy hitting, the Chem-Dogs do field Leman Russ battle tanks in some regiments. Notably, they have been seen operating variants like the Leman Russ Demolisher, short-range siege cannon tank, perfect for blowing apart bunkers or buildings at close range. Fits their style. Go in, blast stuff, maybe blow a hole in a vault. The Leman Russ Exterminator variant, which has a twin autocannon turret for anti-infantry work, is also up their alley. Spray enough bullets, you'll hit something, right? And the Leman Russ Vanquisher, a variant with a long-barreled anti-tank cannon. If the Savlars acquired any of these, it could be because they salvaged them from a battlefield where the original crew was killed. One can imagine a Chem-Dog crew repainting their own crude insignia over a tank they found and roaring back into battle with it. A particularly interesting tidbit. The Savlar 71st Chem-Dogs had, or have, an extremely rare tank, a Leman Russ Executioner. The Executioner is a variant that mounts a plasma destroyer, a very advanced, very deadly plasma cannon, instead of the normal battle cannon. Those tanks are relics from centuries past, hardly ever seen. How in the Emperor's name a penal regiment ended up with one is a mystery. The lore suggests it might have been a survivor of an ill-fated campaign in the chloride swamps of a planet called Goru. Maybe the Chem-Dogs found it abandoned, or their tech priests salvaged and repaired it. Regardless, it became the 71st's command tank. One might picture a scrappy Chem-Dog officer gleefully commanding a tank that most tech curators would drool over, probably not treating it with the reverence it deserves. But hey, it works. As for artillery, the Chem-Dogs have been known to use Griffin mortar carriers, a light self-propelled artillery piece, and Basilisk heavy artillery. Now, giving criminals control of big guns that can fire shells dozens of kilometers might sound like a trust exercise gone wrong. However, presumably any artillery battery is anchored within the larger army structure and possibly directed by more dependable personnel. Perhaps the gun crews include some Savlar convicts and some oversight, like a trusted master of ordnance. Or maybe they were seconded equipment from another regiment. For instance, if the Savlar are holding a defensive line and need to pound an incoming horde, handing them a basilisk or two and saying, "Point that way and shoot when we tell you," might be effective. The records do say they've fielded such pieces, so it happens. One thing you generally won't find in the hands of Chem-Dogs: high-end Adeptus Mechanicus gear or Imperial sacred relics, unless stolen, as noted. They're not trusted with anything that is one of a kind or too precious, not as standard issue. For example, you won't see a chem-dog carrying a holy bolter handcrafted on Mars. Space Marines and Sororitas get those. If he's got a bolter, it's probably a knockoff pattern or looted from a traitor. They also typically don't get things like camo cloaks. Sneaking isn't their forte, they barge in more often than not. Or grav chutes. Not much for aerial drops. Plus, imagine giving convicts parachutes and dropping them over a battlefield. Half might veer off and try to escape. No thanks. Finally, a note on maintenance and tech support. Every guard unit has attached tech priests and engineers to keep machinery running. One imagines the poor engineer assigned to a Savlar regiment has their work cut out. The chem-dogs likely treat their gear rough. Firearms get banged up, vehicles get pushed to the limit. And these guys might not follow proper rituals of maintenance or care, a potentially serious offense in Mechanicus' eyes. So tech priests probably supervise any repairs, also making sure some clever trooper doesn't steal the spare parts. The Savlar also scavenge parts, break off a piece from an enemy truck to fix their chimera, swap out a damaged lasgun barrel with one from a different pattern weapon, whatever keeps things moving. It's a very jury-rigged approach to warfare. In summary, the Savlar Chem-Dogs go to war with gear that mirrors who they are. Not polished, but practical. Not uniform, but utilitarian. They beg, borrow, and steal to outfit themselves. If something is useful, they'll use it, no matter its provenance. Their equipment might not always look impressive on parade, but on the battlefield, a heavy bolter round or a gout of promethium flame gets the job done just as well regardless of the paint job. And when they do manage to snag the good stuff, you can bet they'll milk every last drop of advantage out of it. Woe to the foe who underestimates that ragtag look. Those patchwork soldiers are packing plenty of firepower under all those rags. Notable campaigns and battlefields. The Savlar Chem-Dogs have left their sooty, explosive mark on a number of Imperial campaigns. From their grand debut in the fires of Armageddon to desperate battles on far-flung worlds, they've been thrown into some of the toughest war zones, often because, frankly, they're considered expendable. Here are some of the most notable scraps these crazy regiments have been involved in. Third War for Armageddon, 998 and 41. We've talked about this one a bit already, but it's worth summarizing their role in the wider context. Armageddon was one of the largest conflicts of the late 41st millennium, a planet-wide war against Orc warlord Gazg-Kul's Green Tide. The Savlar Chem-Dogs contributed at least 6 full regiments of infantry and 2 regiments of Chem Riders, mounted troops, to the Imperial defense. The overall Imperial commander, General Kurov, specifically tasked them with the Underhive defense role, those nasty tunnels and sub-levels beneath hive cities that most regular regiments would rather seal off and ignore. By all accounts, the Chem-Dogs performed true to form. They plunged into those stinking depths and made war on any orc mobs trying to sneak through. They also likely had to deal with the local Underhive denizens, mutants, gangs, even chaos cultists lurking below, effectively taking on anything not wearing an Imperial uniform. Their contribution was described as typically inglorious, but valuable. In other words, they did the dirty work. They may not have earned parade marches or medals, but if an orc commando got lost in the dark and suddenly found himself face to gas mask with a lunatic Savlar wielding a flamethrower, well, that orc's story ended there. The Chem-Dogs were seen by General Kurov to be perfect for taking the fight deep into the toxic bowels of the Underhives, and regiments were distributed throughout Armageddon with orders to go as deep into the access tunnels and crawlways as they could. Not only did this suit the Chem-Dogs admirably, as they were able to plunder many old and valuable pieces of archaeotech, but it also dealt with a unique and unenviable battlefield role, Any incursions of orcs that attempted to invade an imperially held hive from the myriad tunnels below were confronted by not only the desperate gangs and mutants that roam beneath the hives, but also some of the most hard-bitten dirty fighters in the Imperium. One specific engagement was at Hades' Hive, a city already infamous from a previous war, Yarek's stand in the Second War. During the Third War, Hades' Hive's defense included those two regiments of Savlar Chem-Riders. When orcs attempted to penetrate the hive's outer perimeter via old waste tunnels, the Chem-Riders reportedly counterattacked, charging through clouded, burning ruins atop their grotesque mounts. It's said the sight was so bizarre that some civilian militia fighters didn't know whether these were friend or foe. Imagine toxic cavalry outriders appearing out of acrid smoke, impaling orcs with explosive lances. Hades' Hive ultimately did not fall to sneaky under-hive incursions, so credit goes in part to the Savlar units who prevented the orcs from bypassing the main defenses. After the war, most surviving Savlar units were promptly shipped off Armageddon, no leaving that many thieves around a war-torn but resource-rich world. They had acquitted themselves as well as could be hoped, which is to say they fought viciously and took horrendous casualties, but made a difference in those confined battlegrounds. And yes, rumors abound that they also made off with plenty of souvenirs from Armageddon's Undercity, antique valuables from abandoned manufactoria, rare machine parts, perhaps even a few orc teeth to sell on the black market. The Steel Legion was probably happy to see them gone, and likely changed a lot of its vault combination codes afterward. Excerpt from General Kurov's post-campaign report on the Savlar Chem-Dogs deployed to Armageddon. While unconventional, the 6 regiments of Savlar Chem-Dogs proved effective in sub-hive combat operations. Enemy orc infiltration via maintenance tunnels was reduced by approximately 87%, largely attributable to Savlar units' aggressive patrols. However, their undisciplined nature presented continual logistical and security challenges. Notably, incidents of theft and looting were rampant. I officially logged 322 separate infractions of misappropriation of Allied resources by Savlar personnel in Infernus Hive alone. Stolen items ranged from ration packs and small arms to an entire Sentinel Walker, recovered after a 3-day search when the Chem-Dog crew attempted to conceal it in a sump shaft. These behaviors, while troublesome, did not ultimately impede the war effort. Indeed, Savlar troops often utilize stolen enemy munitions to supplement their kit. Nevertheless, I recommend that future deployments of Savlar regiments be closely monitored by provost units and limited to zones where their unique qualities and shortcomings can be best utilized. They are a weapon to be aimed at the enemy's vitals but kept on as short a leash as possible. Callistar War. This was a campaign a few decades earlier that saw Chem-Dogs in action, though on a smaller scale. Callistar is an industrial world that came under attack by an orc wag, led by a war boss named Gratstaka. The Imperium threw multiple guard regiments at Callistar to hold it, including at least 2 Savlar Chem-Dog regiments. While other forces fought the orcs on the planet's surface and open deserts, the Chem-Dogs were assigned to Callistar's extensive subterranean transit network. These were basically massive underground highways and maglev tunnels connecting factory cities. The orcs had infested some of these tunnels, turning them into strongholds. Who do you send into dark tunnels full of orcs? Naturally, the guys who don't mind dark tunnels, albeit these had orcs instead of just chemical fumes, though plenty of fumes too from leaking promethium and such. The Savlar regiments went in with their characteristic aggression. They didn't just clear the tunnels, they made a point to collapse them on the enemy. Facing dug-in orc positions, the Chem-Dogs reportedly used nuclear charges, yes, small atomic demolition munitions, to take out concentrations of greenskins. It's a very blunt solution. Find the largest cluster of orcs underground, plant a nuke, run like hell, perhaps pausing to pick up any shiny gubbins the orcs left unattended, and let the explosion do the rest. The strategy certainly reduced orc numbers, though it also shook the bedrock of Callistar and probably caused artificial earthquakes in the hives above. The Adeptus Mechanicus overseeing Callistar's industries were likely horrified at the damage to infrastructure, but sometimes you accept a broken transit network as the price of eradicating an orc infestation. In any case, the Chem-Dogs helped prevent Callistar from falling, albeit leaving a literal smoking crater or two in their wake. Indrani's campaign and the Geratomro reconquest. Late M41. Less commonly discussed outside lore circles, but two Savlar regiments. The 12th and 13th were involved in something called the Indranis campaign, followed by actions on worlds named Callistar, again perhaps a later war in that system, and Geratomro. This might have been a larger war or series of conflicts, possibly during the latter years of EM41, maybe around the time of the 13th Black Crusade or other upheavals. The key tidbit: the 12th and 13th Savlar fought through heavy tunnel fighting on Callistar, likely the same war just described. Maybe they were the ones in those tunnels. By the time they moved on to the next operation, reconquering the world of Geratomro, the 13th Regiment was at only 57% strength. In plain terms, nearly half of them were casualties from the prior meat grinder. That tells you how bloody those fights were, and how the Savlar units often endure staggering losses to achieve their objectives. But true to form, if even a ragged half of the 13th was left, they'd keep on fighting, especially if there was the promise of plunder on Geratomro. What were they fighting on Geratomro? Possibly more orcs, or another enemy drawn by the chaos of war. Regardless, the Savlar were there, albeit battered. That campaign likely concluded with victory. The term reconquest suggests the Imperium took the world back. One imagines the Savlar survivors picking through the ruins afterward, looking for anything of value, spoils, to justify why they, and not their fallen comrades, were the lucky or unlucky ones who lived. Lazuli Catastrophe. Unknown date, late M41. Not all Chem-Dog deployments end in success. The 22nd Savlar Chem-Dogs were sent to a mining world called Lazuli. This turned into a nightmare scenario. Unbeknownst to the Imperium, Lazuli was infested with a genes stealer cult. Those are secret cults that worship Tyranids, extraterrestrial hive fleets, and prepare worlds for the Tyranids' arrival. The Savlar 22nd walked right into a trap where the cult's activities had drawn a full Tyranid invasion to the planet. If you think fighting orcs in tunnels is bad, try fighting Tyranids, swarms of bioengineered monsters, without extensive backup. The 22nd was destroyed to the last on Lazuli. Tyranids don't leave much behind. Odds are the convicts fought tooth and nail, because with Tyranids, there's no running. They'll chase you. Perhaps they even made a last stand atop some mining facility, backed to a toxic sludge pit, gunning down chittering horrors until they were overrun. Let's linger on that mental image. The sky over Lazuli darkens as bioships vomit spores into the atmosphere. The 22nd Savlar Chem-Dogs, hundreds of them, find themselves backed up against a sprawling refinery complex in a burning wasteland haze. All around them are the chittering screams of Tyranid creatures. Picture a ring of desperate men in patchwork armor, taking cover behind slag heaps and broken pipeline machinery. The air tastes of acid and fear. Good thing they're wearing those masks. At the center, a commissar, maybe one of those rare brave ones willing to serve with penal scum, bellows at them to hold the line. Not that they have anywhere to run. Wave after wave of tyrannid organisms rush them, from skittering hormagaunts with scythe-like claws to hulking warrior beasts, spitting venom. The Chem-Dogs fight like cornered rats. One trooper fires his lasgun point-blank into a slavering bug even as it impales him. He manages to draw a knife and stab it in its alien eye before both go down. Another lights up a promethium tank improvised as a giant bomb, incinerating a knot of advancing chitinous horrors, and incidentally himself, a final act of spite and fury. A heavy bolter team, convicts literally chained to their gun to prevent retreat, mow down dozens of smaller creatures, spent casings piling at their feet, until a gigantic tyrannid carnifex barrels through their position. You can imagine the last Vox transmission from the 22nd's commander. Panicked shouting, gunfire, screams, and in the background a Chem-Dog voice cackling with wild laughter, as if the insanity of it all had finally overwhelmed him. Then, silence. When Imperial relief forces arrived, they found nothing but charred craters and bioorganic slime where the outpost used to be. No human survivors. But from the piles of tyrannid corpses littering the perimeter, it was clear the Savlars hadn't died meekly. They took Emperor knew how many of the enemy down with them. For a regiment of the worst criminals, their end was oddly fitting. Defiant, ferocious, and utterly without hope, yet buying time for the greater Imperial war effort with their lives. The Argonne campaign. M42, after the galaxy was ripped in half by the Great Rift, beginning the 42nd Millennium, an era of even greater turmoil, the Imperium launched the Indomitus Crusade to reclaim or reinforce lost territories. The Argonne campaign was one theater of that larger effort. It appears even decades into the crusade, some Savlar Chem-Dogs were still around and being sent into the fray. In sources from early M42, a Savlar contingent is noted in the Argonne campaign, suggesting they fought alongside other Imperial forces, perhaps against Necron expansions or Chaos warbands. Argonne sounds like a crusade against Necrons, but I'm not entirely sure. While details are scarce, it's likely they were used in their typical capacity, high-risk operations in unpleasant environments. The fact this got noted at all means they did something of import there, possibly capturing some vital industrial site or preventing a flank collapse by holding a line no one else could. And true to tradition, they probably took the chance to pocket whatever alien tech or precious baubles weren't nailed down. Warzone Sheridan, M42. Sheridan was the site of a major conflict against the forces of Chaos, specifically the Death Guard, Nurgle's plague-infested Marines, and their allies in the early 42nd Millennium. A Forge world, Metallica, and surrounding systems were invaded in what came to be called the Sheridan campaign. The 88th Savlar Chem-Dogs fought in this campaign. Now, imagine the match made in hell. On one side, diseased-footed Chaos Marines and mutants spreading plagues. On the other, gas-masked chemical addicts from a toxic world. It's almost poetic. Who better to send into plague-infested war zones than people who practically live in hazmat suits and have no illusions about surviving long anyway? The Savlar 88th likely engaged in brutal urban fights on industrial planets like Forge World, Metallica, or others in Sheridan's, fighting chaos. Marines is a far cry from bullying orcs or hive scum. These traitors are superhuman and fearless. Undoubtedly, the 88th took massive casualties as they tried to slow the advance of Typhus, the herald of Nurgle leading the enemy. Perhaps they held a manufactorum for a crucial extra day, their heavy bolters chewing into waves of plague zombies, their flamers cleansing Nurglite cultists. even as those cultists' toxins ate away at their armor. By then, the Chem-Dogs might have been less interested in loot, who wants to loot plague-ridden gear, and more interested in going out in a blaze of glory rather than succumbing to sickness. The records show they fought, that's the main thing. Sharadan was ultimately a costly war for the Imperium, but staved off worst-case outcomes. The 88th presumably was either shattered or greatly reduced by the end. If any survived, I wouldn't be surprised if a fair number coughed themselves to death from exposure to Nurgle's poisons afterward. But they did their duty, perhaps to their own surprise. The Chromid Front and Season of Blood, M42. Along with Sharadan, there are references to Savlar units in actions called the Chromid Front, and something ominously named the Season of Blood. These were likely smaller campaigns or sub-theaters in the post-Indomitus era. Chromid Front suggests a battle line on or around a planet named Chromid, possibly linked to the Charadon or other Chaos incursions. The Savlar present would have been in their element if it involved brutal trench or city fighting. The Season of Blood could refer to a campaign, perhaps against Chaos. The name has a cornate ring to it. If Chem-Dogs were part of a Season of Blood, I suspect it involved horrific close combat. Maybe a world overrun by Chaos cults where the streets literally ran red. The Savlar would be thrown in to suppress cultist rebellions or to slug it out with demon-crazed hordes, because who else do you throw into a meat grinder but the guys already on death row? Without concrete details, we can only say, wherever there's an especially gory, desperate conflict, it wouldn't be surprising if a Chem-Dog regiment was on the roster. The Donoria Prime disappearance, M42. One of the more eerie footnotes in Chem-Dog history is the fate of the 122nd Savlar Chem-Dogs. They were deployed alongside a couple other regiments, the Knack Skull Takers, another famously savage regiment from a death world, and the Vitrian Dragoons, who are known for discipline and glass-like armor. Interestingly, a very different style. These forces were sent to Donoria Prime to deal with a Xenos infestation of creatures known as Donorian fiends and to seal a breach in the alien webway, an Eldar labyrinth dimension. What happened next? Nobody knows. The entire force disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Reinforcements arrived to find nothing, or at least no sign of those regiments. Theories run rampant. Perhaps they stumbled into a portal and were sucked into the webway or the warp. Maybe the Donorian fiends, nasty beasts one assumes, given an entire task force was sent to handle them, overwhelmed them completely. Or, a more sinister thought, perhaps faced with a mission they really didn't fancy, the Savlar 122nd, and maybe their canonic comrades went rogue. Imagine it. A regiment of criminals and a regiment of feral warriors deciding, webway breach? Nope. And deserting together to become mercenaries or pirates. It's far-fetched, especially with the stalwart Vitrian Dragoons present. Those would never willingly disappear. So, something truly strange likely occurred. It remains a little legend among the Astra Militarum, the regiment that went into the field and vanished. The Chem-Dog angle? If anyone were to survive a bizarre scenario and slip away undetected, it might be crafty thieves like them. But unless they show up raiding Imperial shipping lanes someday, we'll chalk it up to war being hell and full of mysteries. These campaigns highlight the versatility and expendability of the Savlar Chem-Dogs. They've fought orcs, tyrannids, chaos, rebels, pretty much every foe of the Imperium. They often get the ugly assignments: tunnel wars, plague zones, suicidal rearguards. And while their overall reputation is not exactly glorious, they get mentioned in dispatches enough to mark that they made a difference, or a particularly memorable mess, in these wars. Each battle adds to their legend. Part feared Penal Legion, part necessary evil for the Imperium's cause. One can only imagine around a campfire, or more likely around a contraband Amasek bottle in a trench, how a veteran chem-dog recounts these fights, with grim humor, boasting how much loot he scored on Armageddon, or how big the explosion was on Calidar, or how he bayoneted a plague marine on Metallica, and maybe a fresh recruit, shipped in from Savlar's prisons as replacements, listens wide-eyed, learning what insane tour of duty he's in for. As long as the Imperium faces dire threats and has desperate measures to take, the Savlar Chem-Dogs will continue to feature in war stories, the unsung, uncouth anti-heroes thrown at the enemy when the High Lords of Terra deem them useful. Faces behind gas masks. Notable chem-dogs. Most Imperial Guard regiments have their celebrated heroes or famous leaders, figures whose names are honored in history. The Savlar Chem-Dogs, being a penal lot, don't exactly produce many lauded heroes in the traditional sense. Nobody on Holy Terra is putting up statues of a Savlar thief who happened to gun down a bunch of orcs. However, over time, a few names and personalities have stood out in the lore surrounding these regiments. Some are infamous leaders. Others are just examples that give a human or abhuman face to the Chem-Dog legend. Judge Callistar. We've already met Callistar as the Adeptus Arbites judge who originally oversaw the Savlar penal colony and first organized the convicts into a fighting force to crush the Savlar uprising. Without him, the Chem-Dogs might never have been loosed on the wider galaxy. By all accounts, Callistar was a hard, no-nonsense man, as any Arbites handling a world of the worst criminals would be. He had a shrewd understanding of criminal mentality, which is why he hit upon the carrots and sticks method that motivates the Chem-Dogs. In a way, he's a twisted mirror of a hero. Instead of inspiring volunteers to glory, he coerced scum into utility. After the formation of the Chem-Dog regiments, Callistar presumably continued to act as their overseer, at least initially, likely as a high commander or liaison from the Arbites. One imagines he had no qualms sending them into deadly missions. That was the point, after all. Interestingly, while the guardsmen themselves might not revere him, he's the jailer who gave them a lasgun, not a beloved patriarch. They likely remember his name because it's his rules that govern whether they get to keep loot or get sent back. If nothing else, every Chem-Dog knows Callistar's law. Break the rules, back to Savlar you go. It's the specter that looms over them. So in Savlar lore, Judge Callistar is both feared and respected, the necessary devil who gave them a chance to fight and plunder rather than rot in a hole. Commissar Colonel Damartes and Commissar Colonel Van Bast. These two are examples of the unique leadership the Chem-Dogs often end up with. Both are commissars by training who also took up the mantle of regimental commanders, the dual role of commissar colonel. They appear in records and in a notable account of a super-heavy tank campaign as figures tasked with leading Savlar units. What kind of men would these be? To be both commissar and colonel, you'd have to be utterly unflinching, authoritative, and not above getting your hands dirty. Damartes and Van Bast were known to run a tight ship, or tank as it were. Under their watch, Chem-Dog regiments were kept on as short a leash as humanly possible, and it worked more or less. They were the type who could shoot a troublemaker in the morning and lead a bayonet charge by afternoon. It's said that under Commissar Colonel Van Bast, the regiment's favorite saying was, "Fear the enemy, but fear Van Bast more." Meanwhile, Damartes was noted for a rather icy calm. He could execute a Savlar soldier for insubordination without even raising his voice, then turn and give tactical orders as if nothing happened. Such steel-nerved officers are rare, but probably the only ones who can shepherd a Chem-Dog unit through a campaign intact. The presence of these commissar colonels in lore highlights that sometimes the Imperium's solution is literally to put a commissar fully in charge. At least then the troopers know the boss won't hesitate to personally discipline them. Sergeant Rojo's gang. Not every Savlar story is one of grudging loyalty. Some are outright tales of betrayal. An anecdote survives of a Chem-Dog NCO, Sergeant Rojo, who essentially went rogue during a campaign. Rojo and a handful of his nastiest subordinates, names like Slavro, Estrone, Janssen, and Toldak, are mentioned. Estrone reportedly met an ugly end, and Janssen had a reputation as an arsonist with his flamer. Decided that raiding the enemy wasn't enough. They'd turn on fellow Imperial Guard if it meant more loot, or perhaps settling scores. In one incident, Rojo's crew ambushed soldiers from another regiment. The unfortunate victims included a sergeant named Avar from an unrelated unit, presumably to steal supplies or valuables. This kind of behavior, attacking brother guardsmen, is of course absolute heresy in the Imperial military code. It wasn't tolerated for long. A commissar named Yendel, who oversaw Rojo's company, eventually caught up with the gang. One imagines a summary court, if any formalities were observed at all, and then swift execution for those mutineers. Rojo's tale is a cautionary one, retold by commissars to other Chem-Dogs. Step over that final line, betray the Emperor's trust, and you won't even get the mercy of going back to Savlar. You'll be shot like the rabid dogs you are. Still, the fact that Rojo managed to operate as a bandit for a time shows the knife edge these regiments walk. Under enough stress or temptation, some individuals just give in to their worst impulses. The Rojo incident also underscores why those mercies and commissars are always breathing down their necks. Karlok Shoam, a story that gives a glimmer of pride to the Chem-Dogs and probably shocked everyone else, is that of Karlok Shoam. Shoam was a Chem-Dog trooper who, after a brutal series of battles on Callistar, ended up being assigned as a crewman to an Imperial Super Heavy Tank Company, specifically the Paragonian 7th Super Heavy Tank Company, a unit from a civilized world known for its armored forces. This is unusual. Savlar troops don't often mix with other regiments, let alone an elite unit of glory hounds with Baneblade tanks. But Shoam distinguished himself in the fighting and somehow earned a place, perhaps as a driver or gunner, in the crew of a brand new Baneblade tank called Cortine's Honor. Now, Baneblades are almost sacred relics of the Imperial Guard, massive, 10-gun behemoths, the pride of any armored regiment. Their machine spirits, the sort of sentient core each tank has, are said to be choosy about crew. The lore goes that the machine spirit of Cortine's Honor actually chose Shoam to be its driver, even though he was an out-of-regiment, low-born convict. This was considered extraordinary, a bit like a legendary sword choosing an outlaw as its wielder. One imagines that moment. Battered Karlok Shoam, still grimy from Callistar's tunnel fighting, is brought before a towering Baneblade fresh off the assembly line. The tank's crew is down a driver due to casualties, and the tech priests insist the machine spirit won't respond properly. Shoam, perhaps on a whim or a desperate volunteer, climbs into the driver's throne, a seat normally reserved for carefully vetted nobles or ace tankers. He lays his hands on the ancient controls. The great engine of Cortine's Honor, which had been stalling and sputtering under others, suddenly purrs to life. Auspex lights flicker on as if greeting him. The Mechanicus adepts, watching exchange astonished binaric chatter. Is the machine spirit pleased? Shoam simply grips the throttle, feeling a connection. Maybe it's just in his head, but who can say? And eases the giant war engine forward with surprising finesse. From that day, Cortine's Honor responds to Shoam's commands like an obedient beast, and he drives it through hellish battlefields without a scratch on its paint. A convict becoming one with one of the Emperor's mightiest war machines. Talk about an unexpected turn of fate. Shom proved to be a competent driver and, when needed, an ice-cold killer. He also had that chem-dog edge. He could run over enemy infantry or execute point-blank shots without flinching. Over time, he apparently won the respect of the otherwise prim and proper Paragonian tankers. Shoam's story is often brought up to illustrate that, despite their background, individual chem-dogs can be as competent and brave as any soldier. Sometimes all it takes is one chance to prove themselves. I'd like to think that in the bowels of that Baneblade, Shom maybe kept a little stash of loot, a traditional Savlar keepsake tucked in a corner. But who knows? His priority became the tank and the mission, and he excelled. If a penal legionnaire can end up as the honored crewman of a Baneblade, it means even in the darkest filth, the Imperium can still find serviceable tools, or perhaps redemption if we're being romantic. Major Callistar. Among newer accounts, particularly one surrounding a Sororitas, Sisters of Battle campaign, there is mention of a chem-dog officer known as Major Callistar. This character led Savlar troops in a narrative where they played foil to an honorable Sisters of Battle force. Hill, the author of that story, shows the chem-dogs in all their terrible glory. Callistar takes up about half the story himself. While not much detail is public beyond that, readers noted that Major Callistar and his company were depicted in their full unsavoriness, exemplifying a contrast between the righteous, the Sisters, and the unrighteous, the Savlar. Callistar was likely an older, cunning convict who had risen through the ranks, maybe by being the toughest bastard around or doing something noteworthy like bringing down a chaos champion with a lucky shot. His portrayal emphasized cunning pragmatism, using ambushes, tricks, and raw brutality to accomplish goals. Perhaps he had a habit of offering first pick of loot to incentivize his men, or cutting deals with underworld contacts even in war zones. In any case, Major Callistar stands as a recent fictionalized example of a chem-dog leader given spotlight, showing that in story as in reality, these regiments have characters rich enough to carry a narrative, even if they are scoundrels to the core. Many readers ended up wanting an entire book just about the chem-dogs, because Callistar's portions were so engaging, even if the overall book had issues. That says something about how compelling these miscreants can be. The Darktide veterans, Sheen, Cartensis, Saris, Slaz. In an interesting crossover with other media, the Warhammer 40K universe has depicted some archetypal Savlar Chem-Dogs in the setting of a hive city infestation, as seen in the video game Darktide, which, while not a novel, was created in collaboration with lore keepers. In that context, names like Bartok Sheen, a grizzled veteran guardsman, Oranus Cartensis, a fanatical zealot, perhaps once a criminal who found faith, Saurus 12, a sanctioned psyker with a code number instead of a name, hinting at a violent past, and Slaz, an ogrin with simple loyalty, appear as individuals hailing from Savlar Chem-Dog units. They're not historical figures from print lore per se, but they demonstrate the diversity within the ranks. You have straightforward troopers like Sheen who just want to survive another battle, zealots like Cartensis who maybe found religion as a coping mechanism, psychers like Saris who are ticking time bombs but nonetheless part of the crew, and abhumans like Slaz who, despite limited wits, form the muscle of many chem-dog squads. The inclusion of these characters in an official game underscores that Savlar's legacy extends to many corners of the Imperium's ongoing struggles. It's actually fitting. If the Inquisition or the Militarum needs deniable, expendable, but effective agents to send into a hive crawling with cultists, grabbing a few chem-dogs from the dungeons and letting them loose is a logical choice. These personalities, whether historical or illustrative, help paint a fuller picture of the Chem-Dogs. They are not all identical, faceless criminals. Some are as cold and authoritative as any proper officer, like our commissar colonels. Others are treacherous fiends, like Rojo, and a few rare ones even achieve a form of redemption or recognition, like Shoam. What they all share is a certain edge, a mix of desperation and audacity that comes from living on borrowed time. In their ranks are murderers and thieves, yes, but also hardy survivors, daredevils, and even the occasional hidden genius or fervent believer. In a traditional regiment, soldiers might bond over shared hometowns or pride in their unit's history. In a Savlar regiment, bonds are more likely forged by surviving a joint punishment detail or pulling each other out of a collapsed tunnel or covering for a mate's unauthorized loot grab so the commissar doesn't catch it. Their heroes may not get lauded by the Imperium at large, but within the unit, the soldiers certainly tell tales, perhaps of Old Krev, the guy who survived 3 mine explosions and strangled an orc knob with a chain, or Lucky Low, who always finds the best loot and hasn't been shot by the commissar yet. These kinds of folk legends circulate in the trenches, giving the newbies something to aspire to or laugh about. One thing's for sure, the Savlar Chem-Dogs produce characters that are as rough and unpredictable as the battlefields they thrive in. You won't find their names in any Imperial honors list, but in the down and dirty annals of the Astra Militarum, they earn a certain grim admiration. After all, it takes a special kind of crazy to do what they do and live to tell about it. An illustrated battle, Chem-Dogs in action. To tie all this together, let's walk through a hypothetical, but entirely plausible, scenario featuring the Savlar Chem-Dogs. Imagine a hive city on some emperor-forsaken world. Let's call it Hive Tertium on planet Volpos. Hive Tertium has a problem. A chaos cult is fomenting rebellion in the lower levels. Planetary Defense Force is getting slaughtered in the claustrophobic underworks. Enter the Imperial Guard. Enter, specifically, the 15th Savlar Chem-Dogs Regiment, fresh off a warp transport and marched straight into the filth. Scene 1 deployment. The 15th Savlar arrives at the staging area just outside Hive Tertium's Underhive sump entrance. They're as ragged a bunch of reinforcements as the Hive overseers have ever seen. Colonel Commissar Grime, a cadaverous, steely-eyed man, is technically in command. He stands atop a stack of ammo crates, surveying his new charges as they assemble. In front of him are a few hundred Chem-Dogs gearing up. Trooper Cole, remember our friend Bren Backstab Cole from earlier, racks the slide on his lasgun while picking his teeth with a sliver of metal. Beside him, Grizz Ulder, another Savlar vet, notable for the string of Eldar finger bones he wears as a necklace, double-checks the fuel line on his flamer, muttering about how he hopes the cultists burn nice and crispy. The air is thick with the stench of promethium and the acidic tang of hive waste. Many of the Chem-Dogs have their rebreathers on, partly for the environment, partly to get a head start on inhaling their combat drugs. A few exchange bets. Who'll grab the most loot today? Who'll shank a cultist priest first? Standard Savlar banter. Watching this with obvious disgust are a handful of local Hive militiamen assigned as guides. These militia troopers whisper among themselves, eyes wide at the penal scum now technically fighting on their side. Commissar Colonel Grime doesn't bother with a flowery speech. He knows his audience. "Listen up, you dogs," he barks, voice amplified by a voxcaster so all can hear over the industrial din. "Down there," he points into the yawning tunnel entrance, "a pack of heretic scum thinks they're tough. We're going to prove them wrong. Your orders: purge the Underhive, kill anything that doesn't pledge loyalty to the Emperor, and bring me the head of their leader." He pauses, then adds with a sly grin, "And you can keep anything you find that isn't nailed down. You know the drill. That gets a ragged cheer from the Chem-Dogs, a few holler in excitement, brandishing weapons." Graham raises a hand for silence, and the last echo of a manic laugh fades. "Just remember," he growls, "you break formation and run, or you pocket something that belongs to the Imperium's war effort, and I will know." His bolt pistol gleams. "And you'll be back on Savlar cracking rocks before you can beg for mercy." The troops know the dance. "Yes, sir," comes a disorganized chorus. Graham nods once. It's go time. Scene 2. Into the Underhive. The Chem-Dogs move out, led by their hapless militia guides. Instantly, the environment becomes their enemy. It's dark. Only dim, flickering lumen strips and the glow of fungus provide light as they descend corroded metal stairways and crawl through half-flooded conduits. The air is hot and moist. Normal men would choke on it, but the Savlars have smelled worse in the mines back home. Cole trudges along near the front, his eyes scanning for glints of anything valuable, even as he keeps his shotgun at the ready. Behind him, Grizz Ulder adjusts a valve on his flamer pack, releasing a tiny puff of chemical incense. A personal concoction he uses that mixes narcotics with promethium fumes. He visibly relaxes as the blend steadies his nerves, or perhaps just dulls his fear. The unit splits into squads to cover multiple tunnel branches, with each group guided by a sweating militiaman who wishes he were anywhere else. Commissar Grimes stays roughly central, flanked by 2 mercies with shock prods. Whenever the column halts at a junction, Grimes' amplified voice snarls, "Keep moving! Fight forward, dogs," sending them further in. Soon they start encountering signs of cultist presence. Blasphemous symbols scrawled in blood on the walls, gutted bodies of hive enforcers hanging from meat hooks. Some Chem-Dogs shrug at that. They've seen worse in prison. The tension rises. A few Savlar troopers instinctively reach for inhalers on their masks. With a hiss and a click, they dose themselves with rage chems. Eyes widen behind goggles. Hearts race. They grip weapons tighter and move with a jittery eagerness now. Cole's squad is among the first to make contact. As they round a corner into an old maintenance hub, basically a wide chamber of pipes and gantries, autogun fire greets them. A spray of rusty bullets clangs off a metal pillar as the Chem-Dogs dive for cover. A militia guide is too slow. He takes a round to the throat and goes down gargling. None of the Savlars rush to help. They're already returning fire. Cole curses and blind fires his lasgun around the corner, sending red darts into the gloom. Another Chem-Dog, Skinner Jax, lobs a jury-rigged grenade, probably a stolen mining explosive, toward the muzzle flashes. Boom! The blast lights up a cluster of ragged cultists in makeshift armor who'd been laying an ambush. 2 are blown apart, the rest scatter or are briefly stunned. Grizz sees his moment. With a whoop, he stands from cover and drenches the area in flaming promethium. The whoosh of the flamethrower's cone momentarily illuminates the entire cavern in hellish orange. Several cultists are turned into human torches, shrieking as they stumble. The Savlars howl in delight. This is the kind of fight they like. They charge forward, guns blazing. A chaotic close-quarters battle erupts amidst the pipes and machinery. Cole finds himself face-to-face with a crazed cultist wielding a chain axe. The heretic's eyes are wild with chaos devotion, but Cole's seen that kind of insane look before. Heck, he's worn it himself. The cultist swings the whirring axe at Cole's head. Cole ducks, feeling the whoosh of air as the teeth skim his helmet. In riposte, Cole jams his lasgun muzzle into the cultist's gut and pulls the trigger. Fzack! point-blank lasbolt through the stomach. The cultist crumples, and Cole, true to form, immediately notices that the guy's chain axe has gilded filigree on the handle. Expensive. He wrenches the weapon from the dying man's grasp. A nice trophy if he can keep it hidden from the commissar later. Nearby, Skinner Jax is grappling with another cultist. Jax gets the upper hand by fighting dirty. He throws a handful of underhive sand right into the cultist's eyes, then stabs him with a shiv in the kidney. As the cultist collapses, Jax nonchalantly reaches down and snatches a fancy-looking ring off the man's finger, looting mid-brawl. The squad's heavy gunner, Torvin, sets up his heavy stubber on some rubble and starts hammering away at a cluster of cultists attempting to fall back to an upper ledge. Brass shell casings rain as he laughs, raking the walkway with fire. Overkill? Perhaps. One cultist's body practically explodes from the impact of multiple heavy rounds. Within minutes, the skirmish is over. The few surviving heretics flee down a tunnel, screaming about "Skargath will eat your souls," as they vanish deeper into the hive. Cole's squad whoops and exchanges crude high fives. One Chem-Dog is down. Nix took a stub round to the leg and bled out. Not that anyone stops to mourn. But they killed at least 20 cultists. Commissar Grime arrives on the scene with his retinue, stepping over the charred corpse of a cultist. He eyes the squad. A Mercy begins collecting ID tags, including Nix's, muttering litanies. Grime inspects the area. "Good work," he allows, glancing at the heap of burnt enemies. He then spots Trooper Cole trying to subtly slide that gilded chain axe onto his back. "Cole," Grime snaps. Cole freezes. The commissar's eyes narrow. For a moment, we expect a summary execution, but Grime instead says in a low voice, "You planning to donate that fine weapon to the regimental armory, Trooper?" Cole, through his mask, gulps and nods vigorously. "Of course, sir. Just securing it for you." Grime huffs. See that you do." Cole's shoulders slump a little. His coveted prize might slip through his fingers after all if Grime follows up. Scene 3, deeper into the cult's lair. The fighting intensifies as the Chem-Dogs push further. The cult, led by a demagogue called Skargath, has holed up in an ancient manufactorum deep under the hive's main reactor. As the Savlar companies converge, they face booby traps. A few penal troopers are blown apart by crude pipe bombs. An ignominious end, though arguably better than Savlar's mines. In one corridor, the cultists flood the floor with corrosive chemical waste. The Chem-Dogs wade through regardless. Their boots and legs sizzle, but these men can tolerate a bit of acid burn. One even fills a vial with the stuff, could be useful or fetch a price later. At a blast door leading to the cult's inner sanctum, the 15th Savlar regroups. They've taken casualties, but they're pumped up on a cocktail of stimulants, combat drugs, and adrenaline. Did we mention adrenaline? It's worth twice. They're that hyped. Commissar Grime orders a breaching charge on the door. Boom! The door flies open, and the Chem-Dogs storm in with a ferocity that shocks the awaiting cultists. It's the grand finale. The manufactorum floor is a scene from a nightmare, lit by flickering firelight and the unholy glow of chaos symbols. The cult leader Skargath, a grotesquely mutated brute in tattered robes, bellows blasphemies from an improvised altar. The Savlars fan out and unleash hell. Grizz Ulder sends a stream of fire across a line of traitor guardsmen who are acting as Skargath's bodyguards. They scream and break formation, patting at flames. Easy pickings for the follow-up volley of lasgun fire that cuts them down. A roar echoes as an Ogrin. Yes, they have an Ogrin with them, a giant slab of a convict named Brule, charges at what he thinks is an especially large cultist in the corner. It turns out to be a chaos-spawned mutant with tentacles. Brule and the tentacled horror get into a brutal wrestling match, crashing through a support pillar. The other Chem-Dogs wisely give them space to sort that out. One Savlar quips, 2 thrones on the big guy, taking bets on Brule versus the mutant. Skargath, the cult leader, raises a demon-infused weapon, some kind of glowing whip of barbed wire, and lashes out at the intruders. One Mercy, leading from the front, catches a slash and is flung aside, his torso cleaved open. For a second, the cult leader's presence causes even these hardened convicts to falter. A wave of fear and nausea, maybe warp magic, maybe just the stench, washes over them. But before anyone can consider retreat, Commissar Grimes steps forward, shotgun in hand, and empties both barrels into Skargath's chest. The lead and shrapnel stagger the big cultist, black blood oozing. "Finish him!" Grime hollers. With an almost psychotic battle cry, half a dozen Chem-Dogs leap at the wounded cult leader. Cole is among them. Chain axe, he did manage to hang on to it, revving as he hacks at Skargath's right arm. Another trooper, Decour, swings a stolen machete at the left. Skinner Jax tosses an incendiary charge onto Skargath's back. In a flurry of violence that would make Korn himself raise an eyebrow, the Chem-Dogs literally hack the cult leader to pieces. The monstrosity collapses, gurgling its last curse. Scene 4. Aftermath. And just like that, it's over. The surviving cultists, leaderless, either flee into the depths or surrender. A fate arguably worse if they end up imprisoned with the Savlars around. The Hive authorities tentatively declare the uprising crushed. Down in the Manufactorum, the Chem-Dogs catch their breath. The place is littered with bodies, spent casings, and smoldering debris. Brule the Ogrin stands victorious over the now headless mutant he fought, clapping his huge hands gleefully. He's got a few extra wounds, but seems not to notice. What do the Savlar Chem-Dogs do in victory? They loot, of course. It starts almost immediately. Grizz Ulder wanders off to pry a still-intact promethium valve off a wall. High-quality metal could sell for a fortune. Skinner Jax is already scavenging fallen cultists for trinkets. Cole, dripping with gore, goes back to Skargath's corpse and yanks out one of the cult leader's tusk-like mutated fangs. He holds it up like a trophy. "Think that'll fetch a bonus from the Inquisitor," he jokes, eliciting dark chuckles from his squad. Commissar Grime oversees the securing of the area. He's inwardly pleased. Casualties were within acceptable parameters and the mission is done. But he barks, "Form up and check your fire. We may have stragglers." Mostly to keep the men busy and distract them from grabbing too much loot. The Mercies move in to confiscate obviously valuable items. That demon whip, for example, is quickly seized to hand over to the Ordo Malleus. No way are they letting the Chem-Dogs play with that. Grime personally walks over to Call, who is busy prying a chaos medallion off Skargath's severed head. Grime just gives him a long stare. Cole sighs and drops the medallion into the designated "For the Emperor" collection sack. It clinks on top of a pile that likely contains other fancy things the Savlars picked up, but couldn't hide fast enough. By the end, the Chem-Dogs are helping carry crates of seized weapons and artifacts out, grumbling that they can't keep every shiny bauble, though their pockets jingle with some unnoticed goodies. They head back up toward the surface, weary but triumphant in their own ragged way. The Hive officials look at these filthy, blood-splattered heroes with a mix of gratitude and revulsion. The day is saved, the heresy purged. And it was done by the most unsavory band of misfits imaginable. As the Savlar 15th marches out, one particularly bold, or naive, Hive Noble approaches Commissar Grime to thank him and his men. The noble offers a chest of reward tokens. Grime waves a hand and responds, "Thank the Emperor. These men did their duty." Behind him, Skinner Jax winks at Cole and whispers, "Duty, sure. If duty fills my flask, I'll take it." Cole suppresses a laugh. The regiment will receive a commendation for this operation, likely a one-line mention in a larger report. But the real reward for the Chem-Dogs? That will be divvied up in quiet moments. A handful of thrones, money, someone pocketed from a cultist shrine, a strange occult book that will be quietly sold to some unscrupulous trader, and of course, bragging rights. "I got more kills than you." "Yeah, but I got the best loot," and so on. In this hypothetical battle, you see the essence of the Savlar Chem-Dogs. Throw them into the worst situations and they will claw, burn, and blast their way through. They might not salute smartly or sing patriotic hymns, unless forced, but they get results in the dirtiest way possible. They'll also rob the enemy, and occasionally allies, blind in the process. But that's the price of using them. In the end, Hive Tertium stands secure, the cult is ashes, and the Chem-Dogs? They live to fight another day, perhaps a bit richer, certainly a bit crazier, and with yet another wild story to brag about in the barracks. In the grim calculus of the Imperium, purity and heroism are cherished virtues. But when those falter, the bureaucracy is perfectly willing to unleash the gutter scum to do the dirty work. The Savlar Chem-Dogs epitomize this ruthless pragmatism. They are not the poster boys of the Astra Militarum. You won't see recruiting holovids celebrating their valor. Many Imperial citizens have never even heard of them, and those who have might shudder at the thought of allies like these. Yet, time and again, when the hour is darkest and the enemies of mankind press in, a signal goes out to Savlar. Another batch of the damned is armed and shipped off to buy victory with their blood and, hopefully, to die before causing too much trouble. Is it cynical? Absolutely. The existence of the Chem-Dogs is a cynical statement about the 41st, and now 42nd millennium. That the Imperium of Man is so hard-pressed, it will fight its wars with chain gangs if it must. Even the famously fearless Katakan jungle fighters have, according to some, admitted they'd rather have a Death World beast at their back than a Chem-Dog. At least the beast's loyalty is predictably instinctual, a testament to how off-the-chain Savlars truly are. But it's also oddly fitting. In a galaxy that knows only war, even the lowliest and vilest can find a purpose, albeit at the barrel of a gun and under the watch of a bolt pistol. For the Savlar Chem-Dogs themselves, there's a grim pride in survival. Most don't expect to live long. They're effectively dead men walking who have traded a slow death in a mine for a chance at a quicker one on a battlefield, with some thrills and loot along the way. If by some miracle a Chem-Dog survives campaign after campaign, perhaps he's no longer the same cutthroat who was sentenced to Savlar, or maybe he's worse. But he will have seen far more of the galaxy than he ever would have from a cell. Some might even start believing in the Emperor, figuring that only divine caprice could have kept them alive through such hells. Others remain bitter to the end, cursing their fate even as they gun down Xenos and heretics, doing the Emperor's work almost in spite of him. Savlar, the dead dog planet, remains a bubbling cesspit producing more Chem-Dogs as the wars demand. As long as criminals are tossed in and wars break out, the cycle continues. It's said that after news of the Chem-Dogs' success spread during the Third War, a few other penal worlds tried similar schemes, but none quite achieved the infamy or insane renown of the Savlar regiments. The name Chem-Dogs itself has become a byword in the Imperial Guard for troops who are uncontrollable yet undeniably tenacious. If a commander remarks we've got Chem-Dogs on this front, it's a mix of relief and worry. Relief that reinforcements arrived, worry about what those reinforcements might do when the enemy is gone. In the end, the Savlar Chem-Dogs are a testament to the Imperium's most brutal truth. Everyone is expendable, but even the worst can be weaponized for a righteous cause. They fight not for glory or honor, but because the only way out of hell is through it. And maybe there'll be some spoils to grab on the far side. Their story is part cautionary tale, part dark comedy, and part war epic soaked in chemical sludge. So here's to the Chem-Dogs, the most crazy regiment you'd never want quartered in your own city. But you just might be grateful for when the orcs are breaching the gate or the hive is burning down around you. They'll charge into the flames, high on combat drugs, whooping like madmen, and do whatever it takes, fair or foul, to take the enemy down. And if afterwards the treasury vault is a bit lighter, well, that's the price of using devils to do the Emperor's work. In a galaxy of horrors, sometimes the only way to kill a monster is to unleash an uglier monster. The Savlar Chem-Dogs have embraced that role. They are the Imperium's attack dogs, filthy, fearless, and utterly off the leash. Their legacy is written in blood, ash, and stolen gold teeth, and it's a legacy that, for better or worse, isn't ending anytime soon.